The Tesla receiver. In 1899, in a remote experimental station outside Colorado Springs, Nikola Tesla reported something he never intended the public to hear. While testing a high-frequency electrical receiver designed to study atmospheric electricity, his instruments began recording rhythmic pulses that did not match lightning, solar interference, or terrestrial static. The signals arrived in repeating sequences, evenly spaced, deliberate. Tesla wrote in his notebook that the impulses suggested a form of intelligence. What his receiver detected that night was not noise. It was structured, and it was not supposed to be there. The apparatus itself was immense for its time. A towering coil system rising nearly 50 feet into the air, fed into a grounded receiver array, buried several feet beneath the soil. Tesla had engineered the device to amplify faint electrical oscillations from the Earth's atmosphere, capable of detecting minute electromagnetic disturbances across vast distances. The receiver utilized a rotating coherer system and a spark gap detector calibrated to isolate frequencies beyond conventional radio bands, long before commercial radio even existed. According to surviving sketches, the system could capture oscillations so weak that standard equipment would classify them as background interference. On several occasions, the pulses appeared in grouped clusters of 3. They repeated in patterned intervals, separated by fixed pauses. Tesla carefully ruled out thunderstorm activity, as the skies over Colorado Springs were clear during multiple recordings. He considered planetary electrical resonance and even distant lightning from other continents, but the timing did not align with known atmospheric phenomena. In a private letter later published decades after his death, Tesla wrote that he believed he had intercepted signals from another world. Modern physicists have since proposed that Tesla may have been detecting natural cosmic radio waves, perhaps from Jupiter's magnetosphere or solar activity. Yet in 1899, no such explanation existed. More importantly, Tesla himself insisted that the signals contained an intentional cadence. He described them as counted, as though someone were sending a message in primitive form. After returning to New York, Tesla publicly hinted at the discovery during a press interview, but quickly retracted his statements. Funding for his Wardenclyffe Tower project collapsed shortly afterward. The Colorado logs were partially archived, partially lost. Some entries referencing the structured pulses were never formally published. Later, biographies softened the incident, framing it as enthusiasm rather than evidence. What remains unsettling is not that Tesla believed he heard something. It is that his receiver was never built to search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It was meant to study electricity. And yet, through an instrument designed to observe the invisible electrical skin of the Earth, he may have stumbled onto a signal that did not originate from it. If the pulses were natural, they represented a phenomenon science had not yet discovered. If they were artificial, then Tesla's machine had briefly pierced the silence between worlds. Either possibility alters the narrative of technological history. Because if a 19th century electrical coil could detect something beyond our atmosphere, then perhaps the barrier between visible and invisible is thinner than assumed. The question is not whether Tesla misinterpreted noise. The question is what his machine was truly capable of detecting, and why, after that night, he became far more careful about what he chose to reveal. The Edison Spirit device. In October 1920, during an interview with the American magazine, Thomas Edison made a statement that startled even his closest associates. He revealed that he had been working on a device designed to communicate with personalities who had survived physical death. This was not a seance, not a parlor trick, and not spiritual theater. Edison insisted it was an instrument, precise, mechanical, calibrated. He described it as a machine capable of detecting units of life, too subtle for human senses. After that announcement, silence followed. No prototype was ever publicly demonstrated. No working model survives. And yet, the declaration came from one of the most pragmatic inventors in modern history. The device, according to fragments of interviews and private notes, relied on extreme sensitivity rather than amplification of known signals. Edison believed that if consciousness persisted in any measurable form after death, it would manifest as microscopic energy disturbances. His concept involved a valve system connected to a finely tuned electrical circuit that could register minute fluctuations in pressure and electromagnetic variation. Unlike the crude spirit boards popular at the time, Edison's approach was industrial. The apparatus was rumored to contain layered vacuum tubes arranged in cascading sensitivity, each calibrated to detect energy variations smaller than those produced by static discharge. What made this claim unsettling was Edison's reasoning. He argued that the human body functioned as an aggregate of countless tiny life units, and that upon death, these units dispersed. If even one retained identity or coherence, a sufficiently sensitive device could detect its presence. He did not frame the machine as mystical. He framed it as inevitable. If something exists, he argued, it must interact with physical laws in some measurable way. No blueprint of the spirit communication device has ever surfaced. No photographs of a working unit exist in the official Edison archives. Some researchers suggest the device may have been a speculative idea never completed. Others point to laboratory inventory logs that list an unnamed high-sensitivity valve prototype constructed in the early 1920s. The records stop abruptly after Edison's death in 1931. Equipment from his final workshop was cataloged, but several items were marked as experimental and never itemized in detail. Mainstream historians often dismiss the spirit phone as an eccentric aside, a curiosity from a man nearing the end of his career. Yet those who studied Edison's later notebooks noticed repeated references to subtle detection thresholds and post-organic persistence. He did not abandon the idea casually, he refined it. After his death, the topic faded from public discussion. The rise of radio, cinema, and industrial expansion overshadowed any serious inquiry into post-mortal instrumentation. But the question lingers. If Edison believed that consciousness interacted with matter in detectable ways, then the spirit communication device was not about ghosts. It was about instrumentation limits. It implied that human senses are insufficient, and that machines might reveal layers of reality inaccessible to biology. If the device was built and failed, its disappearance makes sense. If it was built and succeeded, its disappearance becomes harder to explain, because confirmation that consciousness survives the body would not simply alter religion. It would destabilize physics, medicine, and the entire framework of human mortality. The most disturbing detail is this. Edison never retracted the claim. He simply stopped speaking about it. The Tesla consciousness lens. In 1901, inside his laboratory on East Houston Street in New York, Nikola Tesla began experimenting with a peculiar optical apparatus, unlike anything he had previously demonstrated. Unlike his towering coils or high-voltage transmitters, this device was compact and composed of layered quartz plates, thus finely polished mirrors, and a rotating electromagnetic frame. Tesla referred to it in private notes as a concentration lens for subtle energy. It was never patented, it was never publicly displayed, and no complete schematic survives. The apparatus reportedly consisted of a cylindrical housing approximately 3 feet long, containing stacked crystalline lenses arranged in graduated curvature. Around the housing, a copper coil assembly generated oscillating electromagnetic fields at controlled frequencies. Tesla theorized that certain forms of energy, including those associated with thought and biological processes, vibrated at frequencies outside visible light, but within the broader electromagnetic spectrum. If those vibrations could be focused through resonant crystal layers, they might become perceptible. Unlike a telescope, which magnifies distant objects, the consciousness lens was designed to amplify ambient field fluctuations in close proximity. Tesla wrote in a letter fragment that the human organism emits oscillatory patterns measurable with proper instrumentation. He speculated that consciousness itself was a structured field phenomenon, not confined strictly to the brain, but radiating outward in subtle waves. According to one assistant's later recollection, Tesla conducted late-night trials in a darkened room. Volunteers were asked to sit motionless while the apparatus rotated slowly within its electromagnetic frame. Observers reported faint luminous distortions appearing near the subject's head and shoulders when viewed through the crystal assembly. The distortions were described as vaporous outlines or fluctuating light gradients, visible only when the electromagnetic field reached specific harmonic intervals. Skeptics would later argue that the reported effects were optical artifacts caused by lens refraction and electrical discharge. High-voltage oscillations can produce corona glow under certain atmospheric conditions. However, Tesla allegedly claimed that the phenomenon varied depending on the mental state of the subject. Agitated individuals produced irregular patterns. Calm individuals generated stable formations. No published paper documents these experiments. After financial collapse forced the shutdown of Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's research trajectory shifted dramatically. Many of his later projects were abandoned or reduced to sketches. References to the optical lens appear only in scattered notes, some recovered after his death in 1943, when U.S. government officials seized his papers for review under national security protocols. What makes the Tesla consciousness lens distinct from his radio receiver experiments is its direction. It did not search outward toward distant planets. It searched inward toward the human field itself. If Tesla believed that thought was measurable as oscillation, then the lens was an attempt to render that oscillation visible. Modern neuroscience acknowledges that the brain produces measurable electromagnetic activity. Electroencephalograms detect microvolt fluctuations across the scalp. Magnetoencephalography measures faint magnetic fields generated by neuronal firing, yet these instruments translate signals into graphs, not images. Tesla's device allegedly sought direct visualization. If, even partially functional, the consciousness lens would imply that awareness is not an abstract property, but a field interaction extending beyond neural tissue. The boundary of the mind would no longer end at the skull. The lens disappeared along with much of Tesla's final work. Whether it failed, succeeded, or was simply too speculative to pursue remains unknown. The more unsettling possibility is this: if consciousness radiates in structured patterns, and if those patterns can be focused like light through crystal and coil, then the invisible layer surrounding every human being may be far more tangible than assumed. The Raudive Archive. In 1959, inside a soundproof laboratory in Uppsala, Sweden, psychologist Konstantin Raudive conducted what he believed would be a routine linguistic recording experiment. The room was acoustically sealed, the microphone was isolated. The reel-to-reel tape recorder was brand new and tested for interference. Raudive asked a simple question aloud in Latvian, then allowed several seconds of silence before stopping the tape. When he replayed it, a faint voice answered. The reply was not his, it was not in the room, and it was not expected. Over the next decade, Raudive would record more than 70,000 fragments of what he called electronic voice phenomena. Unlike earlier attempts at spirit communication, his method relied on controlled conditions. Some sessions were conducted in the total silence. Others used white noise as a carrier signal. The recording equipment included high-fidelity microphones, shielded from external radio frequencies, battery-powered tape systems to avoid electrical contamination, and in some cases, Faraday cage enclosures to block outside transmissions. Yet voices continued to appear. The characteristics were consistent. The voices were brief, often lasting less than 2 seconds. They frequently responded directly to questions, sometimes in languages Raudive did not speak. In one documented case, he asked in German, "Is anyone here?" A voice replied in Latvian, "We are." Spectrographic analysis showed that the vocal frequencies did not align with typical human speech patterns. The pitch was compressed, the cadence accelerated. Some sounded metallic, as if spoken through circuitry rather than lungs. Skeptics argued that the phenomenon could be explained by pareidolia, the human tendency to impose meaning on random noise. Others suggested stray radio interference. Raudive countered by conducting experiments in radio-shielded environments. In certain sessions, he used a microphone disconnected from any input, recording only internal circuit noise. The voices persisted. The more controlled the environment became, the clearer some responses appeared. In 1971, Raudive published his findings, accompanied by audio samples. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some researchers quietly attempted replication. A handful reported similar results. Others dismissed the recordings as artifacts of analog distortion and subconscious suggestion. Academic institutions refused to formally endorse the research. Funding evaporated. Raudive continued recording until his death in 1974. What unsettles investigators decades later is not the presence of ambiguous whispers. It is the pattern. The voices often referred to themselves collectively. They spoke in fragmented grammar, as though operating within compressed time. On rare occasions, they used the experimenter's name before it was spoken aloud. One recording allegedly captured a phrase predicting equipment failure minutes before the tape recorder malfunctioned. After Raudive's death, large portions of his archive were redistributed, mislabeled, or lost. Some original master tapes reportedly deteriorated under unexplained magnetic distortion. Others were transferred to private collections. The remaining recordings are studied quietly by enthusiasts and fringe researchers, rarely acknowledged in mainstream discourse. If the voices were psychological projections, they reveal extraordinary properties of human perception. If they were external transmissions, then the recorder was not capturing random interference, but structured communication embedded within electromagnetic noise. In either case, the implication is unsettling. The boundary between silence and signal may not be fixed. It may be porous. The most persistent question is this: when the tape was running in an empty room, who was speaking? The Spiricom Console. In 1980, inside a modest laboratory in rural Virginia, engineer George Meek and psychic researcher William O'Neill activated a machine they claimed could establish two-way voice communication with a deceased scientist. The device was called Spiricom. Unlike passive tape recorders used in EVP experiments, this was a fully constructed console designed to transmit and receive simultaneously. According to its creators, it did not merely capture stray voices in static. It stabilized a channel. The Spiricom console consisted of 13 oscillators generating continuous audio tones across a narrow band of frequencies. These tones were fed into a transmitter that produced a constant carrier signal. The theory was that a non-physical intelligence could manipulate these tones, modulating them into speech by altering frequency patterns. O'Neill wore a microphone headset connected to a control unit, while a large analog panel displayed waveform variations in real time. The equipment filled an entire table, wires coiled between signal generators, amplifiers, and monitoring speakers. During early sessions, faint vocal sounds emerged from the speaker. Over time, the responses grew clearer. The entity identified itself as Dr. George Jeffries Muller, a former NASA scientist. The voice claimed to speak from another plane of existence and described technical details about signal modulation and energy stabilization. Recordings released by Meek captured conversations in which Muller answered questions, adjusted his volume when requested, and even referenced details about O'Neill's environment. Engineers who later analyzed the recordings noted something peculiar. The voice appeared to be partially synthesized, yet not entirely mechanical. The waveform lacked the typical harmonic structure of a human vocal tract, but exhibited consistent modulation patterns. Skeptics argued that O'Neill himself may have unconsciously produced the voice through a form of ventriloquism or electronic manipulation. However, supporters pointed out that certain responses occurred before O'Neill finished speaking his questions. Attempts to replicate Spiricom by independent researchers produced inconsistent results. Some recreated the oscillator array but reported only static. Others claimed brief anomalous vocal bursts. Meek maintained that the system required precise calibration and environmental conditions. He also stated that the communicating entity had instructed them how to refine the circuitry. In 1982, demonstrations of Spiricom were abruptly halted. Funding ceased. Meek withdrew from public exhibitions. The original console was reportedly dismantled, its components stored separately. No commercial version was ever released. Audio tapes of the sessions circulated privately, but were never authenticated by a neutral scientific body. The most unsettling aspect of Spiricom was not the claim of after-death contact. It was the shift from passive recording to structured exchange. If genuine, the machine implied that non-physical intelligences could interact with electronic infrastructure, provided a stable frequency bridge existed. That would mean the barrier between dimensions was not metaphysical, but technical. If Spiricom failed, it remains a curious experiment in fringe engineering. If it succeeded even once, it suggests that communication does not require proximity, breath, or biological presence. It requires modulation. The console was silent after 1982, but the recordings remain, and within them, a voice insists that death is only a transition in signal, the ghost sweep box. In 2002, a former audio technician named Frank Sumption unveiled a handheld device that would quickly become one of the most controversial tools in paranormal investigation. It was a small radio-based instrument with a simple mechanism. It scanned rapidly across AM or FM frequencies, cycling through dozens of stations every second. The concept was direct. By sweeping continuously between broadcasts, the device would generate fragmented audio. Investigators claimed that within those fragments, responses emerged, not random words, answers. The device, later known as Frank's box or the ghost box, operated by muting traditional tuning stability. Instead of locking onto a single station, it advanced in rapid increments, sometimes covering the entire band in less than 2 seconds. The output was a chaotic stream of syllables and half-formed words. The theory suggested that an unseen intelligence could manipulate this stream in real time, selecting fragments and arranging them into coherent responses. In effect, the machine provided raw material. Something else shaped it. Early demonstrations showed investigators asking questions aloud, while the box emitted bursts of speech from passing radio fragments. In several recordings, single-word replies appeared to correspond directly to the question asked. When someone asked, "How many are here?" a clear voice within the sweep replied, 3. When asked for a name surfaced from the noise. Critics argued that rapid radio scanning naturally produces recognizable syllables and that human perception stitches meaning into randomness. Yet some sessions produced multi-word phrases that seemed contextually aligned with the dialogue. Technical examination revealed no hidden transmitters or pre-programmed responses. The circuitry was straightforward. A modified radio receiver with altered tuning control and audio output amplification. The device did not generate original speech. It relied entirely on existing broadcast signals. That fact made the claims more provocative. If responses were indeed being formed, they required real-time modulation of live radio fragments. The manipulation would have to occur within milliseconds. Sumption himself expressed caution. He warned that the device could produce misleading results and that interpretation was subjective. Yet investigators across North America began documenting sessions in which the ghost box appeared to provide immediate, relevant replies. Some experiments were conducted in radio-sparse regions to reduce station density. In a few cases, coherent responses still appeared, despite limited broadcast input. No mainstream laboratory has endorsed the ghost box as evidence of non-physical communication. Psychologists attribute the phenomenon to auditory pareidolia and expectation bias. However, the device's popularity endures because of its immediacy. Unlike tape recorders requiring playback analysis, Frank's box produces responses in real time. It creates the unsettling sensation of dialogue. The deeper question is not whether radio fragments can resemble answers. It is whether external agency could exploit an existing signal stream as a carrier. If so, the ghost box does not create communication. It exposes a vulnerability in our signal-saturated environment, a vulnerability that implies something might already know how to use it. The Kirlian Camera. In 1939, inside a modest laboratory in Krasnodar, Soviet electrician Semyon Kirlian accidentally placed a photographic plate beneath a metal electrode connected to a high-voltage power supply. When the current surged, a faint corona discharge formed around the object on the plate. The image that developed stunned him. Around the silhouette of a simple leaf appeared a glowing halo, intricate and branching, as if the object were surrounded by an invisible field. The discovery would later be called Kirlian photography. And for some, it was the first mechanical glimpse of a biological aura. The apparatus itself was deceptively simple. A high-frequency, high-voltage generator was connected to a conductive plate. A photographic film was placed between the plate and the subject. When electricity passed through, ionized gas around the object created a visible corona discharge captured on film. Under normal scientific explanation, the glow resulted from moisture content, pressure, and electrical conductivity. Yet, repeated experiments revealed something more unsettling. In one widely cited experiment, a leaf was photographed, then partially cut. When the remaining fragment was placed back on the plate and rephotographed, the image reportedly showed the faint outline of the missing portion, still glowing in corona discharge. The phenomenon became known as the phantom leaf effect. Skeptics later argued that residual moisture and double exposure artifacts could account for the result. But early demonstrations fueled speculation that the camera had captured something beyond physical tissue. Further experiments involved human fingertips. Subjects placed their fingers on the conductive plate, while voltage pulsed for fractions of a second. The resulting images displayed varying corona intensities, depending on emotional state, stress levels, and reported mood. In some Soviet laboratories, researchers attempted to correlate these changes with physiological metrics such as heart rate and galvanic skin response. The results were inconsistent but provocative. The glow shifted unpredictably. Unlike EVP devices that relied on interpretation of sound, the Kirlian camera produced visual evidence. The halos were tangible images, measurable in millimeters, with branching filaments extending outward from the subject. Under controlled humidity, the discharge patterns still varied between individuals. Some researchers speculated that the technique might reveal an electromagnetic biofield surrounding living organisms. Others insisted it was merely an electrical artifact exaggerated by mysticism. During the Cold War, certain Soviet research programs reportedly explored applications of Kirlian imaging in medical diagnostics and stress detection. Western scientists dismissed the method as pseudoscience, yet quietly studied similar high-voltage discharge photography techniques. Public enthusiasm for aura photography surged in the 1970s, but serious institutional research declined. The more extraordinary claims faded from academic journals. What remains is the unsettling premise that a living organism interacts with surrounding electrical fields in complex ways not fully mapped by conventional physiology. The camera did not invent the glow. It revealed a property of matter under extreme electrical stress. Whether that glow represents simple ionization or a structured biofield remains unresolved. If life emits more than heat and measurable electrical impulses, then the boundary between visible flesh and invisible field is not clean, it is layered, and the Kirlian apparatus suggests that what surrounds the body may be as dynamic as the body itself. The God helmet. In the early 1980s, inside a dimly lit laboratory at Laurentian University in Ontario, neuroscientist Dr. Michael Persinger began testing a device that resembled a modified motorcycle helmet wired with electromagnetic coils. The apparatus was designed to stimulate the temporal lobes of the brain using extremely weak, complex magnetic fields. The goal was scientific, not spiritual. Persinger wanted to understand how the brain constructs perception. What he reported instead was the consistent induction of something far more unsettling, the sensation of an unseen presence. The helmet, later nicknamed the God helmet, contained solenoid coils positioned along the sides of the skull. These coils emitted patterned magnetic pulses measuring less than 1 microtesla, far weaker than the Earth's natural magnetic field. The stimulation targeted the temporal lobes, areas associated with memory, emotion, and the integration of sensory information. Participants sat alone in a dark soundproof chamber for up to 30 minutes, while the fields fluctuated in programmed sequences. A significant percentage of subjects reported nearly identical experiences. They described feeling watched. Some sensed a shadowy figure standing behind them. Others perceived a presence hovering just outside their peripheral vision. A few reported profound spiritual encounters, claiming they felt the nearness of God, deceased relatives, or unidentified entities. The intensity varied, but the core sensation remained consistent. Someone else was in the room. Critics quickly argued that expectation bias explained the results. Participants knew they were part of a consciousness experiment. Suggestion alone, they said, could account for the perceived presence. Persinger countered that many subjects were not informed of the intended outcome. In some trials, individuals unaware of the experiment's purpose still described a distinct other in the chamber. Follow-up studies attempted replication. Some laboratories reported weaker effects. Others failed to produce similar experiences altogether. The debate centered on whether the magnetic stimulation genuinely triggered structured hallucinations, or whether the brain, deprived of external stimuli and darkness, generated its own narratives. Yet brain imaging during stimulation revealed measurable changes in temporal lobe activity, suggesting the device was doing more than placebo suggestion. What makes the helmet relevant to the question of invisible detection is its implication. The device did not capture voices or light anomalies. It altered the brain's internal signal processing. It demonstrated that under certain electromagnetic conditions, the human mind constructs the perception of an external intelligence. Whether that intelligence is internal or external remains unresolved. If consciousness can be manipulated by subtle magnetic patterns, then the sensation of presence may not require a visible source. It may require only the correct frequency. The unsettling possibility is that the helmet does not create the presence. It simply tunes the brain to something already there. The Dream Machine. In 2011, inside a controlled imaging facility at Kyoto University, researchers placed a volunteer inside an fMRI scanner and asked him to sleep. As the subject entered rapid eye movement cycles, the scanner recorded blood flow patterns across the visual cortex. Outside the chamber, a separate computer processed the neural data through a machine learning algorithm trained on thousands of labeled images. Hours later, researchers displayed the reconstructed output. Blurry shapes emerged on the screen. A staircase, a human figure, a fragment of text. The machine had not photographed the dream. It had translated neural activity into visible form. The apparatus combined functional magnetic resonance imaging with predictive modeling software. The fMRI scanner measured minute changes in blood oxygenation levels across the brain, detecting which regions activated during specific mental imagery. Before the sleep phase, participants were shown hundreds of images while their neural signatures were mapped. The algorithm learned to associate patterns of cortical activation with visual categories. During sleep, when spontaneous imagery occurred, the system attempted to decode those same patterns without external input. The results were imperfect but recognizable. Subjects later confirmed that certain reconstructed images aligned with elements of their dreams. The system could not produce high-resolution pictures, but it identified general categories with statistical accuracy significantly above chance. A similar experiment in California reconstructed short video clips participants were watching by analyzing visual cortex activity in real time. The reconstructed footage appeared distorted and abstract, yet it mirrored the original content. Unlike earlier devices that attempted to detect external anomalies, this machine operated entirely within the brain. It did not claim to contact invisible entities. It revealed invisible thought. The human mind generates imagery without light, without projection, without physical manifestation. The reconstruction system converted internal electrochemical patterns into something observable. Skeptics noted that the technology relies heavily on prior training. The algorithm must first learn an individual's neural responses to known images. It cannot spontaneously decode entirely unfamiliar mental constructs with clarity. However, the implications extend beyond technical limitation. If subjective experience can be translated into external data, then the boundary between private perception and measurable reality narrows. Research funding for advanced neural decoding expanded rapidly in the following decade, primarily under medical and assistive technology frameworks. Public discussion focused on restoring communication for paralyzed patients. Less attention was given to the philosophical dimension. If dreams, memories, and imagined scenes can be reconstructed, then the machine does not merely observe the brain. It extracts hidden content. The unsettling possibility is not that dreams can be seen. It is that internal imagery, once thought intangible and inaccessible, may be rendered into observable signal. The invisible becomes visible through translation. If thoughts can be decoded, what prevents deeper layers of consciousness from being mapped as well? The infrared figure. In 2005, during a late-night survey inside an abandoned hospital complex in the American Midwest, a research team deployed a multi-sensor infrared tracking array designed for wildlife monitoring. The system consisted of 3 FLIR thermal cameras mounted at different elevations, each calibrated to detect temperature variations as small as 0.05 degrees Fahrenheit. The building had no active heating, no occupants, and no functioning electrical systems. Yet within minutes of activation, the central monitor displayed a human-shaped silhouette moving down a corridor. The figure registered as colder than the surrounding air. The tracking array operated across multiple thermal wavelengths, allowing technicians to distinguish between living bodies, residual heat signatures, and environmental fluctuations. The hospital's interior temperature averaged 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Rodents and small animals appeared clearly on the display as bright signatures against cooler backgrounds. The anomaly was the opposite. It absorbed heat instead of emitting it. The silhouette stood approximately 6 feet tall, with defined shoulders and head proportions, but showed no measurable internal temperature. Technicians immediately checked for sensor malfunction. All three cameras captured the same form from different angles. The object moved at walking speed, passing through a doorway and disappearing from view. When investigators physically entered the hallway, nothing was present. Air temperature remained stable. No drafts were detected. The cameras continued recording. 2 minutes later, the silhouette reappeared at the far end of the corridor, paused, and then faded gradually until the thermal reading normalized. Thermal experts reviewing the footage noted that conventional explanations such as cold air pockets or reflective surfaces could not produce a moving humanoid outline with consistent proportions. Infrared imaging works by detecting emitted heat radiation. For a cold shape to appear against a warmer background, it must block or redirect ambient thermal energy. In practical terms, something must occupy that space. The tracking array had originally been developed for military perimeter surveillance. It could differentiate between humans, animals, and inanimate objects based on heat distribution patterns. In this case, the silhouette displayed the geometry of a person without the thermal signature of one. Follow-up tests in the same building over several nights captured additional anomalies, though less defined. Skeptics argued that sensor noise, lens artifacts, or environmental interference could create illusions. However, synchronized recordings across multiple independent cameras reduced the probability of random malfunction. After several months, funding for the hospital survey ended. The anomaly footage was archived without formal conclusion. The disturbing implication is not that infrared cameras capture ghosts. It is that under certain conditions, they reveal spatial disruptions not visible in the optical spectrum. The device did not rely on interpretation of sound or subjective perception. It registered measurable deviation in thermal energy. If something can occupy physical space without producing heat, it challenges basic thermodynamic assumptions. Matter interacts with temperature. Presence implies energy exchange. The infrared anomaly tracking array suggests that in rare instances, presence may not follow those rules. The corridor remains empty to the naked eye, but the sensors recorded otherwise. The Biophoton Detector. In 1974, inside a completely darkened laboratory chamber in Marburg, Germany, biophysicist Dr. Fritz Albert Popp placed a living cucumber seedling inside a light-sealed box connected to an ultra-sensitive photomultiplier tube. The device was calibrated to detect single photons, individual particles of light. No external illumination entered the chamber. The plant had been kept in darkness for hours, and yet the detector began registering faint pulses. The organism was emitting light. The apparatus was engineered for extreme sensitivity. Photomultiplier tubes are capable of detecting ultra-weak photon emissions down to a few dozen photons per second. The chamber walls were coated in matte black material to eliminate reflection. Temperature was stabilized to prevent thermal noise. Background radiation was measured and subtracted. After calibration, the detector consistently recorded low-level light emissions from biological samples. Human skin cells, plant leaves, and even isolated DNA strands produced measurable photon bursts. The emissions were not random flashes, they followed patterns. Popp observed that healthy cells emitted more coherent light signatures than stressed or damaged cells. In some experiments, exposure to toxins altered the photon rhythm within minutes. The phenomenon became known as ultra-weak biophoton emission. Conventional biology explained it as a byproduct of metabolic reactions involving reactive oxygen species. Yet the coherence of certain emissions suggested organization rather than chaos. More unsettling were experiments involving multiple biological samples placed in separate chambers. In isolated conditions, photon emission patterns occasionally synchronized. When one sample was stimulated with light, a second sample in a nearby chamber sometimes exhibited subtle shifts in emission intensity. Critics argued that stray electromagnetic interference could account for the effect. Control tests reduced, but did not entirely eliminate the correlation. The biophoton emission detector did not reveal ghosts or voices. It revealed that living systems glow continuously at levels far below human perception. The body is not dark in darkness. It radiates faint light invisible to the naked eye. If biophotons carry information within cells, as some researchers proposed, then light may function as a communication medium inside organisms. Mainstream science accepts the existence of biophotons, but frames them strictly as biochemical side effects. Research into coherence and informational properties remains marginal. Funding for exploratory models linking biophoton emission to consciousness has been scarce. The equipment itself remains highly specialized, rarely deployed outside experimental laboratories. The unsettling implication is simple. If organisms emit structured light continuously, then every living being exists within a subtle luminous field, invisible, measurable, persistent. The detector did not create that field. It only revealed it. The question is not whether life glows. It does. The question is what information that glow carries, and whether something else might be able to read it. The dimensional scanner. In 1998, inside a low-frequency monitoring station in northern Alaska, technicians operating a sub-Hertz signal array began detecting a repeating anomaly beneath the threshold of standard seismic and radio interference. The installation had been designed to study geomagnetic fluctuations and extremely low-frequency emissions generated by solar storms. The antennas stretched across several acres, each mast standing nearly 60 feet tall, calibrated to capture signals below 30 Hz. What they recorded that winter did not match known geophysical patterns. The scanner detected a structured pulse at approximately 7.83 Hz, close to the Earth's natural Schumann resonance frequency. At first, researchers assumed it was atmospheric activity. But the pulse did not drift with lightning density or solar variation. It remained fixed in rhythmic bursts lasting exactly 19 seconds, repeating at irregular intervals over a period of several weeks. The waveform analysis showed modulation within the baseline frequency, as if information were embedded inside a carrier tone. The equipment involved was sensitive to fluctuations as small as 1 pikotsla in magnetic variation. Data was cross-checked against regional seismic monitors and satellite-based magnetometers. No tectonic shifts corresponded to the pulses. Solar weather reports showed minimal disturbance, yet the scanner continued logging the anomaly. When engineers attempted to triangulate the signal's origin, the readings appeared to emanate not from a fixed horizontal location, but from a depth profile inconsistent with any conventional source. The vertical vector suggested a layered origin, as if the signal were interacting with the ionosphere and subsurface strata simultaneously. Independent analysts later proposed that the anomaly could have been a rare geomagnetic resonance event. However, the modulation pattern within the waveform raised questions. Embedded within the 7.83 Hz base frequency were higher harmonic fluctuations repeating in non-random intervals. The pattern did not correspond to binary code, prime sequences, or known natural oscillation signatures. It exhibited structure without recognizable language. The installation's data logs from that winter were partially archived. Several segments were marked restricted due to national security protocols. Public summaries of the monitoring period omitted reference to the repeated pulses. The anomaly was categorized as atmospheric irregularity and filed without detailed publication. What makes the dimensional signal scanner unsettling is not that it detected low-frequency energy. It is that the structure of the signal resembled intentional modulation layered within a planetary resonance. The Earth itself vibrates at measurable frequencies. If something were capable of imprinting information onto that resonance, it would not require traditional radio transmission. It would use the planet as a carrier medium. Whether the anomaly was natural or engineered remains unresolved. The scanner did not prove the existence of another dimension. It proved that structured information can exist below the threshold of human perception, riding on frequencies normally dismissed as background noise. If the Earth hums continuously, the question becomes whether every fluctuation is geological, or whether occasionally something hums back. Conclusion: these machines reveal a disturbing pattern. They were built by inventors, engineers, physicists, neuroscientists, not mystics, not stage performers. Each device was designed with a specific goal: to detect what human senses cannot perceive. High-frequency receivers listening beyond radio, consoles attempting structured dialogue, cameras capturing bioelectric halos, helmets altering the perception of presence, thermal arrays revealing forms without heat, scanners probing the subatomic tremor of vacuum noise. Individually, each device can be dismissed, noise misinterpreted, psychological suggestion, statistical artifact, instrumental anomaly. But collectively, they trace a consistent trajectory. Every time instrumentation pushes sensitivity beyond conventional thresholds, something unexpected appears. A pattern in static, a presence in darkness, a structure in randomness, and each time, the reaction follows a familiar script. Funding disappears, data is archived, demonstrations stop. Research is reframed or quietly abandoned. These were not isolated curiosities. They form a chain of attempts to pierce the boundary between visible and invisible reality, and repeatedly, that boundary appears less solid than assumed. If even one of these machines detected more than error, the implications are staggering. It would mean that consciousness, energy, or structured information exists outside the narrow bandwidth of human perception. It would suggest that our senses define reality not by completeness, but by limitation. The loss is not merely academic. If unseen layers of existence interact with physics, biology, or thought, then entire fields of knowledge remain unfinished. Each dismantled apparatus represents a question left suspended. Each abandoned project leaves open the possibility that something was glimpsed and then set aside. The question is no longer whether invisible phenomena exist. We already know most of reality is invisible to the naked eye. The deeper question is this: how many of these machines were built not to discover the unknown, but to prove that it was never empty to begin with? And if the instruments continue to grow more sensitive, what will they reveal next that we are not prepared to acknowledge?